So I'm going to introduce Tina Shields from Imperial Valley Irrigation District. She's going to talk about innovations in irrigation, and then I'll be giving hand signals, waving, and hooks and those kinds of things with all three kind of moving forward. So I'd like to introduce Tina Shields to the podium.
Hi, everyone. I am Tina Shields. I am one of the water managers at the Imperial Irrigation District. I did not get the memo on the title about innovations in agriculture, but I'm going to talk about our program, which I think really tees into the living with less that we have discussed here today and where we're going on the river. But a little context for IID, for those of you not familiar with our little irrigation district. We are a little old. Water diverted into Imperial Valley in 1901, so 125 years of water flowing. About 2 weeks ago was the anniversary of that. And about 10 years after water started flowing, a lot of the companies that were involved, the private water companies, went bankrupt, and the community had a vote to form the Imperial Irrigation District. A lot of that bankruptcy was tied to the Salton Sea and that little problem we had back in the day. And I'll talk about that more because that's sort of a consequential effect of a lot of the innovative programs we're implementing within the district to reduce our water use and to still continue to farm and to provide that food supply. Within the district, we're also the 6th largest public power agency in California. So our power service area extends north of our water service area, which is pretty much south of the Salton Sea to the Mexican border in Southern California. And our power district goes up into the Coachella and Riverside Valley. So if you're buying a home or a second home in Palm Springs, you want to get on the IID side because public power is way cheaper than private water or private power companies, and your power bill, when it's $115 in the summer, will be a lot more manageable as well. We have a very extensive service area. We are the largest irrigation district in the nation. Our service area is beyond 1 million acres, but the irrigated acreage is only about 500,000 acres. So again, we do a little bit of farming. If you enjoyed your lunch today, thank a farmer. If you eat lettuce in the wintertime, it's coming from Imperial or from the Yuma Valleys, and that is all by Colorado River. We are very dependent on the Colorado River, even though we're at the very end of the system and the water travels about 85 miles off the river to get to our community. It is our only water supply. So we have a vested interest in protecting the resiliency of the system to ensure that we can continue to farm and feed the nation for the next 125 years. Our water is diverted through Imperial Dam into the All-American Canal. Those are reclamation facilities that we operate under long-term contracts. So we're very privileged to manage our system and to deliver the water into the Imperial Valley. So our service area is a gravity flow system, so that's what makes our water very cost-effective. We manage about 3,000 miles of canals and drains. Some crazy guys back in the day did a survey and found out that you could get that water off the river into a really fertile ag district area. We farm 365 days a year. We have productivity that's off the charts, and it's a little slow on Christmas and Sundays, but absent that, our system runs year-round, and we don't have an off-season or a maintenance season. So everything we do, particularly our conservation efforts, have to occur year-round. Our water rights are held in trust by the district, so it's not a landowner-based system. We have significant water rights, including 2.6 million acre feet of water rights with a 1901 priority date. So we also have some limitations. In 2003, I'll talk about some of our water transfer programs, but if you've heard of the quantification settlement agreement, that quantitation was relating to the fact that we did agree to limit our water use for 45 years to that 3.1 million acre feet. And what we're going to talk about in a minute is how we're making do with less to help benefit other irrigation districts and water supply agencies in Southern California, as well as Lake Mead. So what do you do with that water? Well, you grow a lot of things, you feed the nation. We have an ag economy locally that is almost entirely dependent on agriculture. It's a rural area, as you can imagine, about 180,000 people, more cattle than people, which is probably not an uncommon statistic for a lot of the rural areas. But we grow a little bit of everything. About 70% of our crops are forage crops, but in the wintertime, that's sort of our big ticket time of year. It's also, at that point in the year, extremely beautiful. extremely mild weather, and we are able to grow lettuce and onions and pretty much everything except for the stone fruit crops. We have citrus, we have dates. I'm going to do the shameless plug for my board member. If you are interested in dates, Doc's Organics, they're on Amazon and they're extremely tasty. But we do a lot of things down there that provide the food and the forage for the nation, including the forbidden alfalfa that people love to bash, but it's really a staple crop for the food supply and for farmers in general to help manage their businesses. We also dabble a little in conservation. Unfortunately, while formed as an irrigation district and then getting into the power business, we have kind of a little side gig doing large-scale agricultural conservation through not only the quantification settlement agreement, but the precursor to that was our conservation program with Metropolitan Water District that started back in 1988. So we've got a pretty strong track record of 30-plus years of doing conservation. That program, Metropolitan, came in and provided large-scale funding to essentially revamp our infrastructure system. They built reservoirs. They lined about 270 miles of canals. They implemented some minor on-farm technologies, upgraded our SCADA system, built lateral interceptors, and in exchange for that conservation and the funding of that program and the long-term O&M funding, which continues to this day, they receive 105,000 acre-feet of water. And that water was documented and verified through a pretty rigorous verification program, and it has withstood the test of time from an implementation standpoint. In 2003, we got strong-armed, bullied, I don't know what your word is, but we got enticed, maybe is a better word these days, into the quantification settlement agreement, which settled some disputes among the Southern California water agencies, but also enacted a series of additional water transfers with the San Diego County Water Authority and the Coachella Valley Water District. Those programs total about 300,000 acre-feet, along with a canal lining project. We lined about 22 miles of the All-American Canal that saved close to 70,000 acre-feet. So we have large-scale programs going on that we implement on a daily basis. So it's not just to cut the water order. It is an active process with our system improvements, with our grower programs, which was sort of the hallmark of our San Diego transfer, and with our Coachella agreement. And if you look at this graphic, it's just the overlay of all of the different programs we implement within the valley. Our normal conservation is about 500,000 acre-feet a year. Our programs are fully ramped up as of this calendar year was the last little bit of ramp up with our Coachella transfer. But you'll also see more recently we've been working in collaboration with the federal government to use some of their funding to implement some short-term conservation programs. And we leave that water in Lake Mead, adding quite a bit of elevation to help under these drought circumstances. Our conservation is pretty extreme. Last year, we conserved 726,000 acre-feet. Oddly, it's a round number. It doesn't usually work out that way. And largely, it's through 3 primary programs. About 1/3 of the water is created from these large-scale system improvements on our infrastructure. About 1/3 of the program is from a large-scale on-farm program where we fund field-level technologies for growers. So think drip systems, sprinkler systems, tailwater return system, precision land leveling, and that's conserving on average about 200,000 acre-feet a year. And then more recently, we have, through programs developed by our growers, implemented what we call a deficit irrigation program. It's really a mini fallowing program, but you all have heard me say fallowing is an F word in Imperial Valley, so no farming community will ever volunteer to fallow ground because we like to see that ground in production and growing food. But understanding that our only water supply is the Colorado River and seeing some of those elevation drops that occurred a couple of years ago, and with the hydrology we have now, our farmers started really thinking that we can stand by our water rights, but we need to be a little bit more proactive in helping the river help itself, and what can we do to contribute to ensure long-term viability of that supply. Frankly, it's in our own best interest to be good participants and extra good conservation generators to help prop up the system. And so this deficit irrigation program targets 3 crops, alfalfa, Bermuda, and Klein grass. We provide funding to our growers to not irrigate for 45 to 60 days. We kicked off our 3rd and final program June 1st, so on Monday. It's a phased-in program. It will encompass about 160,000 acres of voluntary participation from the growers. We will lock their gates. We started Monday. We deployed 225 locks, and it's a rolling program throughout the summer. At its peak, there'll be about 120,000 acres that aren't irrigated, and then in exchange for the growers taking a crop loss, the yield reduction, and then they'll have some damage to their fields. They'll have to go back in and reseed when they come out of the program. They have a funding incentive to do that. And it's not the best time of year for quality of hay. Also, the markets are not the greatest right now, so it's been a real, I think, beneficial program all around to both the river and to our growing community to help get them through some of these tough ag markets right now. We also run, you'll see in the corner, this TLCFP. That's a little, the nickname is Solar Fallowing Program. So our area has lots of sun, and a lot of solar developers have come in quite to our disdain as an irrigation district and taken over farmland and put solar panels on it. So they're farming the solar, and we are able to take that water and use it for our transfer purposes. And we do that willingly, so at least we have some beneficial use of that water in the meantime and can meet those Southern California obligations. 5 minutes, I'm gonna rush. So the Salton Sea. So if you understand our valley, water comes into the valley. The fields and the crops use about 2/3 of the water, and about a third historically has run off in the form of subsurface leaching water or surface water. And that is the water we target for conservation. The challenge is when you conserve water from efficiency and not fallowing, every acre foot of efficiency is an acre foot of reduction in runoff to the Salton Sea. The Salton Sea has challenges. It's super salty. It has no fresh water source, and it has no outlet. So every year it gets saltier and saltier, and it's become a huge environmental challenge for our community. When we implemented these transfers, it also is going to result in exposed playa. And to date, we have about 40,000 acres of playa that used to have water on top of it, and now it's subject to prevailing winds and potential huge public health issues in our community. And so it was a real challenge, and frankly was the linchpin that kept the QSA from going into effect back in the day until the state of California stepped up and took on a restoration responsibility. These are just some modeling graphics. There's a QR code on there if you want to go see the video. Don't do it now because the music is loud and horrible. So if you have your phone on mute, you can watch it. But it's an animation of what's going to happen over the 45-year term. And what you see is a shoreline receding 4 miles. And it's pretty scary if you live there. And when it gets dusty, we have whiteout conditions these days. And so that's very different dynamic. The state of California has done a really great job. I can say that now. They kind of sucked for the first 10 years, but they're on it now, and they've done a really good job of implementing large-scale wetlands projects and dust control projects. And you see here some of the pretty impressive weir structures they've built. They blend the Salton Sea water with drain water, and they're recreating the habitat that has been lost due to the salinity. Here's your obligatory bird and engineering pictures for those who like it. I couldn't leave it out. I'm going to go really fast, but get to the end. And you can see that when you add water, the birds do come back. And once the fishery is reestablished that was lost to the high salinity, then the birds come back and the critters all start to come back as well. IID similarly runs a proactive program. We use a lot of science-based technologies where we quantify the dust emissions. We've worked really closely with the state to kind of get ahead. They're really good at building things. We're really good at planning, and we identify through our various dust programs what pieces of ground are most likely to be emissive based on their soil conditions and using LIDAR surveys, and then we target those for these proactive dust control measures. Our biggest challenge, though, is to the west of the Salton Sea is a huge desert area, and you can see from this graphic where the emissions are coming. They look like they're coming from the sea, and in fact, some are coming from the sea, but the challenge we have is location being just to the east of that large desert sand dune area. And frankly, to the south, we have Mexico, and their emissions controls are not as strong from a regulatory standpoint. So it's a challenge we have, that we know that we do good things by being efficient in our water use, but then it causes these local impacts that our community has to live with. I think I'm about to run out of time, but I will leave you with the scale of what we do. So this is just a quick little graphic showing our 3.1 entitlement. Our growers actually only used about 71% of that water last year. About 726,000 acre feet was active verified conservation measures through these programs that we implement on an annual basis. And then we had about 165,000 acre feet of water that was unused and left in the river. Unfortunately, in California, it's subject to a priority system, and other lower priority users can divert that water. But really, I think it is a poster child of being innovative. And the great thing about the programs we manage is we're keeping that land in production at the same time. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
I want to talk about living with less. The Gila River Indian community is a legacy of adaptation. There are 4 words that I want to use as we go through this presentation: adaptation, resiliency, innovation, and what I call holism. So for those of you that are not familiar with where the Gila River Indian community is located, we are located just south of Phoenix, where the arrow's pointed to, 375,000 acres, of about which 250,000 is irrigable acres, as defined in Arizona v. California under the practically irrigable acreage doctrine. Community is home to the Akimiautam and the Pipash, or the Pima and Maricopa people. Much of what I want to focus on really emanates out of the Arizona Water Settlements Act of 2004. I want to preface it by saying that, and in all seriousness, the community has irrigated its lands for thousands of years. And in fact, they were propitious farmers in the desert. In the mid-19th century, the community was known as the breadbasket of Arizona, with goods that were transported all the way into modern-day Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Southern California, down into Tucson and into Mexico. But over the course of the late 19th, early 20th century, the community began to adapt because the waters of the Gila River were diverted upstream, and in time, very little water made it to the community. So obviously there was a lot of adaptation that had to occur. The old irrigation system, in most instances, was 6 to 8 feet above the river, because the river, after the upstream diversions, began to erode, incision, and so the river actually dropped, but the old headings were upstream. Well, let me jump all the way to 2004. The Arizona Water Settlements Act provided statutory recognition and stability of the community's water resources. There are 9 discrete water resources. I've lumped them together here. It's a huge water budget, not as large as Imperial, but nonetheless, it's a large irrigation budget of 653,500 acre feet of water. And you can see it includes groundwater. Globe Equity is Gila River water, and I will tell you, we lost all of our Gila River water last Saturday. For the 5th time since 2000, San Carlos Reservoir went dry. We are currently, there's no water in the Gila River. We have Salt River water rights, the Haggard Decree. We have 2 classes of Central Arizona project water, non-Indian ag and Indian priority. We have some Salt River project water that's stored in their system, and then we have reclaimed water, all of which adds up to 653,500 acre feet of water. Well, the first area I want to talk about is adaptation. So this is the system, and there will be several other pictures to illustrate what we inherited from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. It was a very inefficient system. When water comes down the Gila River, by the time it hits our diversion point, we've lost 23% of the water. By the time the water comes off the river and reaches the reservation boundary, we've lost roughly another 20% of the water. And then on reservation, we modeled this in all of our canals, we lost anywhere from 10 to 90% of the water, depending on the canals. Well, this is what we inherited, but we have been busy. We have improved or have under construction over 350 miles. We have about 310 miles completed. We have about 40 or 50 under construction. And this is what the new system looks like. It's a state-of-the-art system that is SCADA compatible, meaning it can be remotely operated. We have measurement on all the structures. We have all measurement on all of the turnouts that are going out to the individual farm fields. This was another example of the old system we inherited, and some of our federal partners might recognize this photo because we took this back to Washington quite frequently to show the fine state of the system we inherited. It was an old, obsolete, antiquated system that today has been completely modernized. This is not the exact same structure, same location, I should say, but it gives you an idea of what the new system looks like. Again, it's state-of-the-art, high-tech, automated system. What that is allowing the community to do is to convert fallowed land into productive farmland. Now, I will say, as the drought worsened, our irrigated acres began to decline. We actually were on the incline, not in the hundreds of thousands of acres like IID, but we had hit 36,000 acres in 2009 with a goal of hitting 50,000 by this year. That didn't happen. Once the community began to participate in leaving water in Lake Mead under the drought contingency plan and under some system conservation implementation agreements, we started to fallow land. We dropped all the way down to 29,000. Today, we are just over 31,000 acres. Our goal, we're about 3 years from completing the whole modernization of the irrigation system. Modernization meaning concrete line ditches or pipeline, all with state-of-the-art measurement. No longer will we be using the old antiquated earth line system. Our goal is we will be able to deliver water to 90,000 acres. We don't think we'll ever hit 50,000 because of the continued drought that is occurring. Some of the ways we have adapted in the modern sense of the word, the canal that runs diagonally across this slide is our main canal. That's the Pima Lateral that takes water off of the Gila River and takes our Colorado River water entitlement. As we constructed that, we put this triple barrel siphon in for our non-Indian component. The San Carlos Irrigation Project is both Indian and non-Indian growers, each have 50,000 acres. We put that in just as an example. Another way we innovated, we did something that had never been done before. We have only hired the best contractors available. This particular reach was put in by Brosemer and Wall. Some of you may recognize them. They have lined, in fact, they did portions of the All-American Canal. They have lined canals all over the world. We employed techniques here that had never been done before. We had a 5-week dry out. We had to line a 2.9 miles of canal, but it had to be steel reinforced. And so we had all the steel matting prepared ahead of time. We floated it in. You can't see it. The crane is above all of the equipment, and we paved right over top of it. And it worked beautifully. Just another example, this is our Gila River siphon. The old siphon was on the upstream side of what's called Oldberg Bridge. It had a capacity of about 120 CFS. It leaked. Just as a little humorous story, my family is all from the Netherlands, so we know a little bit about water, and you might know about the little Dutch boy who stuck his finger in the dike. Well, one day we were at that old siphon, and water was gurgling out through a hole about the size of a quarter, and I found a stick lying there, and I thought, well, I'm going to plug that. I'm going to make my ancestors proud. Stuck it in there. 30 seconds later, another one popped up over here. Well, we replaced that siphon with this 132-inch diameter siphon that goes under the Gila River. This siphon is now in full operation and use. This is the South Side Canal. This is what serves the tribal farm on the south side of the community. It's 24 miles long. It was completely rehabilitated and modernized. All of this just being part of modern day adaptation to changing systems, changing climate systems, I should say. Now I want to talk a little bit about resiliency. How has the community been resilient in utilizing its water? Well, under the Arizona Water Settlements Act, the community was forced to accept reclaimed water. So we took water from the city of Mesa, we took water from the city of Chandler. At the time, nobody wanted that water because of the social stigma that's attached to it. There was a huge learning curve. We had a very hard time convincing growers on reservation to allow us to convey that water through the system. We found select areas where we could use it, but as time went on, some of those barriers broke down and we adapted. We are now delivering that water to about 90% of all the community's land. Now, one of the reasons the community, and under the settlement, we actually had a relatively small amount, but the community has continued to exchange some of its Colorado River water for reclaimed water because those barriers have come down. All of those exchanges are on a 5-to-4 basis. And the benefit to the community, and this is part of resiliency, is that reclaimed water is zero-cost water. Colorado River water, if we had to purchase it this year, and we are taking some water, we did not take any for irrigation purposes in 24 or 25. This year, we're taking 15,000, and that cost of water is about $210, and that does not include the OM&R, which is paid by the United States under a subsidy. Again, as you see there, expensive CAP water versus zero-cost reclaimed water. So this is, if you look at the aqua-colored line, our system runs from the bottom right to the top left, follows the Gila River. When the community under the water settlement accepted these two reclaimed water sources, we very early on, we at PMIP said that water's on the wrong side of the river. The demand is on the south side of the river, but all the water is on the north side. But under our master repayment contract, we were not entitled to use our funds to build a reclaimed water pipeline. So the community entered into an exchange, into an agreement, I should say, with Reclamation under the BIL, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. In fact, we became the first BIL-funded project to go into construction, as you'll see on the next slide. And we constructed this 19.5-mile-long pipeline that pumps water 105 feet uphill. Begins on the far left. Again, you see that black square. That pump station just went live last Friday on the 29th of May. And then in the middle, where the yellow and the blue come together, we have another pump station. Last year, we pumped 9,000 acre-feet of reclaimed water all the way to the bottom right of the screen, where we put it back into the system. We can then pump it uphill to the tribal farm, or it can flow back down and serve all of the lands you see on this and beyond. 5 minutes, boy, we got to go fast. All right, well, this created a lot of flexibility. As I said, this was the first BIL-funded project, created a lot of flexibility. We had Vice President Kamala Harris come out. There's Governor Lewis and myself with the Vice President. It was a big deal, and there are some folks here in this room that helped make that happen, so I thank you for those of you that are here. Another form of innovation is managed aquifer recharge. So this is all part of the Bring Back the River program. The Gila River Indian community, Gila River is very instrumental in the name, or in their language, the Akimiawatam, the river people. It's hard to be the river people with the river being central to the life, economic, political, cultural, social, when there's not a flowing river. So the community adopted this Bring Back the River program, and the question was, how do we do this in a cost-effective way? We cannot use Gila River water because that's decreed, tied to a specific parcel of land, but we could use Colorado River water. And so we identified multiple potential sites where we could recharge the groundwater, the aquifer, and have a flowing river. Where the stars are, those are the 4 sites that we have put into production. We are permitted for 60,000 acre-feet. We're not going to get that this year, where we've reduced that flow. In fact, where our CAP this year is going to be about 41,000 acre-feet. That all was to go to recharge, but we're moving 15,000 to start for irrigation purposes. I won't spend any time on this other than say we took the hydrology, the known hydrology of southern Arizona, we doubled it, and said if we take that hydrology, which did not take into effect climate change, what might the future look like? And you can see the white areas are water shortages. Areas in red, we would have to pump a lot of groundwater. Now, this was assuming a 90,000 acre facility. While maintaining options and to exchange water credits. What you're looking at here is the Gila River Interpretive Trail, technically known as the Oldberg Dam Underground Storage Facility. It's not quite as sexy as MAR 5, but that's too simple, so it's the Gila River Interpretive Trail. Here we are just simply putting water on a tertiary bench of the Gila River, and we're letting it percolate into the ground. We get a flowing river of about a mile on this particular site, but more importantly, we're recharging the water. And I have a slide here that'll show you how much we put in. We started off reservation on some of these surrounding irrigation districts as part of an in-lieu recharge program. We then did a pilot permit with ADWR, and that permitted area is shown there. In interest of time, this is what it looked like before we did anything. This is in 2013. There was the first time we delivered water, and it was a learning experience. We wanted to see, we worked with a hydrogeologist, not like we went out there, like somebody said earlier, Winnie the Pooh. We wanted to make sure we had a good site. And this was the first water that was delivered. We added a distribution box in 2016 so we could control and better distribute the flow of the water. Within 1 year, we added not only this north channel to get water into the main stem of the river, but also into the braids, and you can see the vegetation that came back. All of that came back on its own. Again, in 2018, we started the planning process with the Gila River Interpretive Trail. This is what it'll look like in 2021. I really need to update this photo, but nonetheless, it gives you a good idea. 2023. We planted 3,000 native plants to this area, not just native to Central Arizona, not just native to the community, but native to this area of the community. The only thing we planted really were the trees, cottonwood and willow trees. We ended up winning 4 very prestigious awards in 2019. Here, the governor and I are at Arizona Forward when we won the prestigious President's Award. Our second site, again, it's not a sexy looking site, but nonetheless, it's a recharge site. This one we turned off 10 days ago because we are reallocating the CAP water for irrigation purposes. This is our most recent site. We completed it in 2023. This is right adjacent to Interstate 10. For those of you familiar with Arizona, where the Gila River, I-10 crosses the Gila River, we're on the southwest corner. We have recharged roughly 240,000 acre feet at these 3 sites combined. Evapotranspiration losses, we monitor that regularly, and it's less than 2% annually. Another form of innovation, solar over canal. Something we had looked into back in 2014 when, and I know I mispronounce it, but Gujarat, India became the first in the world to put solar panels over a canal. In 2019, Governor Lewis called me in his office and said, what do we need to do to make this happen? I want to be not only the first in the Western Hemisphere, but I want to show the world that the community is serious about the environment and protecting the water. So we partnered with both Bureau of Reclamation on one site and the Army Corps of Engineers on another. This is what we call the I-10 Level Top Canal Solar Over Canal Project. This is our Casablanca Solar Over Canal project. This one is roughly 3,000 lineal feet. The other one's about 1,000 lineal feet. We just completed a third site. I don't have a photo of it, but the third site where actually will go live on or around the 1st of July. And then our most recent site is a floating solar over Westside Reservoir Canal. All told, these sites will generate roughly 18 to 20% of the power demand for the reclaimed water pipeline and the irrigation districts. The community's goal is to generate enough renewable energy to completely offset the power demand of moving water across the community. Last area I want to talk about, I call it holism. We partnered again with Rubicon Water out of Australia. And I know you can't really see a whole lot on this photo, but these are still projects that are under construction. These are automated bay drives. What that means is we have sensors in the field. We have roughly 1,290 acres of land on the tribal farm that's under a Rubicon Farm Connect. These are the bay drives. These are all automated. When water hits a certain point and gets to a certain depth, the gate automatically closes, the next one opens. We also included blade valves on a portion of the farm where the farm ditch was so small, we replaced it with pipeline and had to put these blade valves. Again, these are all automated, and here's the purpose. On the top is traditional flood irrigation. You overwater the upper end of the field, but the bottom end of the field tends to be under. Or if you try to get the bottom end of the field completely saturated, then you way overwater the upper end. With advanced surface irrigation, with the Rubicon technologies, the goal here is to shoot the water across the field as rapidly as possible. Our goal is 20 CFS turnouts. Some of them are not quite 20, but we're reducing the set times on the tribal farm. Right now, on non-automated laterals, it takes anywhere from 8 to 12 hours to irrigate the fields. We're doing it in less than 2 hours. And my last slide here, it's a holistic approach. The community's vision is to restore Curiacamo, Old Man River. It's to diversify its hydro-based economy to support all of the community goals. It's to restore the aquifer. And I didn't point it out, but I think you can imagine in central Arizona, there has been massive, especially in Pinal County, where we're located, there has been massive overdrafting of groundwater. The water table is deep. Most of our new wells going in are anywhere from 900 to 1,500 feet deep. We want to restore the aquifer for future groundwater extraction. Also monetizing the water in these recharge facilities to give the community credits so that can be sold or they can recover those water to reinvigorate and grow an agricultural economy. And then it's all being done so that the 21st century, the community growers can farm in a culturally compatible way. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we may run a model here, so I need to run off my old computer, and I know that having somebody come up who represents a group of computer programmers and scientists say we'd like to run a model at your conference, Doug, is a little bit nerve-wracking sometimes. But Doug was convinced once he saw it, so hopefully it'll work here. The internet bandwidth will determine that. Thank you, Tina and David. Really inspiring work you guys are doing. What I'm going to talk about is how we approach work like that. One of the things that we're really well known for and particularly good at the Freshwater Trust is taking something that is really big and ambiguous and large, a really complex problem, and making it much more specific. So, we know that we need to help farmers adapt to drought. We know we need more water in the system. We know here in the Upper Basin that we are going to be needing to contribute to a conservation pool. And these are very general statements. And what we typically do is work with districts and irrigators to figure out how do we make that much more specific so that we know the specific actions that we need to take, the actions that deliver the best outcomes for the least cost, and exactly what those outcomes are going to be. So we oftentimes talk at the Freshwater Trust about having a price tag and a finish line. And I'm going to talk about our work with the Uncompahgre Valley Water Users Association today, and about a project where when we look at our modeling and look at some prioritized outcomes for projects, we can look at that model and say, there is a viable pathway without upgrading the whole system to deliver 100,000 acre feet of consumptive savings in 5 years. 400,000 acre feet of efficiency savings from canal lining projects in the first 20 years those projects are available. 200,000 acre feet of on-farm efficiency savings that help farmers adapt to the drought also over the 20-year period. So I'm going to show you sort of how we got there. Before I do that, I'm going to begin by giving a little bit of background to the Uncompahgre Valley Water Users Association, the challenges that it's facing, I'll talk about some of the outputs of our model, and then hopefully we'll dive into a demonstration. I think this is a model that's real exciting because it's so visually impactful. Oftentimes these systems are so vast, especially one like Tina's operating, and we just say, how does this all work? And when you look at these models, you say, well, I begin to understand it. In fact, we've had water masters and ditch riders who have worked at this, who have decades of knowledge in their head, and they see it come to life when we develop these tools. So moving into the background for Uncompahgre, the Uncompahgre Valley Water Users Association, they manage the Uncompahgre project. It's one of the first major projects developed under the Reclamation Act. They are the largest diverter in the upper basin. They support about 76,000 acres of production in the lower Gunnison River Basin, hydropower, M&I as well. You can see there in the map on the right, they're below the Aspinall units, below Blue Mesa. In the lower portion of the Gunnison River, water is piped through the Black Canyon, which is a national park now, through the Gunnison Tunnel into the Uncompahgre Valley, where it joins the Uncompahgre River, irrigates these lands, and then the returns go back into the Gunnison, and then around the bend as we get into the Grand Valley, it joins the Colorado River, and then as we round the bend into Utah, Powell is just off the upper left side of the screen there. So positioned right between some key crisp units there. Again, it pulls water out of the national park. There's a gold medal fishery through there with target flows. Down in the lower Gunnison, we have critical reaches for our endangered species with record of decision flows that need to be met there. And this is one of these rural areas that Amy talked about earlier, where production here generates over $100 million each year in total economic outputs. The situation that we're facing right now is obviously a declining hydrograph that's part of the title of our talk today. This, and I think Brad mentioned, reducing in the upper basin, given where the hydrology is, that's a frequent practice here, and that is true. The Uncompahgre Valley started this year at 50% of its usual allocation. It is going to be going down below that this year for certain. This is an antiquated system that is not meant to run at 50% and is very difficult to manage at 50%. Steve Pope, the general manager who's here with us today, says, sometimes I feel like I am operating a museum here. So this is an early 20th century system where we're trying to solve 21st century problems. There are 550 miles of canals and laterals delivering water. If you think of the drainage canals added to that, you get over 750, 3,500 turnouts, 76,000 irrigated acres, as I mentioned, about 4,500 fields, 100% gravity fed, 97% surface irrigated. And there is, as this system was designed, there is a real intensive capture and reuse of those returns. So what the association has learned in other modernization projects, like with the salinity control program, where they're piping to control salinity, is a lot of these projects have all sorts of unintended consequences that could not have been foreseen. So it's one of these big elephants, like where do we start without creating a whole host of other problems here. So if we were to upgrade this entire system, which would eliminate any of those adverse consequences, it would cost billions of dollars. But we don't need to upgrade the whole system, and that's the beauty of what some of this modeling shows. One of the things that we learned when we developed this model was that we could reduce 50% of the seepage loss and infiltration in this system by lining just 6% of the canals. So when you are looking at spending your money wisely, these are the kinds of insights you want. So we don't need to upgrade everything. What we really need is more of an integrated, data-driven project that says, what are the projects that are going to get us the results we need for the best cost. And so as we begin to look at what the most impactful projects are, we are looking at a lot of the kinds of projects that Tina and David had talked about. So 40 miles of canal lining, which hits that 6%, 6,000 acres of on-farm irrigation upgrades where we have the greatest opportunity to reduce the headgate demand. That creates additional water in wet years, helps farmers adapt in dry years. And then a 5-year voluntary conservation program. This is a really neat place where a lot of experimenting has already occurred with split season irrigation practices under SCPP, where we're not dewatering the fields for the whole year, but we're looking at this nexus of if we have a July 1 shutoff date, is there a benefit to the payments that come in, the water we save, where we still make maybe a little bit more if we're a producer, but we can also contribute some of that conserved consumptive use. So these highest impact, most cost-effective projects, as I mentioned at the start, they can deliver 100,000 acre-feet of consumptive savings over 5 years, on-farm efficiency savings over 20 years. The first 20 years projects are operational, 200,000 acre-feet. Again, in wet years, that can go back, and dry years, that helps farmers. And then no matter what the hydrology is, at a minimum, 400,000 acre-feet of efficiency savings after the first 20 years canal projects are lined. Our modeling just looks at the core irrigation season, so it's actually going to be higher than that when you think about the shoulder seasons and charging the system and draining the system. So the real important thing for us about that right now is it creates the ability to move water up in the system. And for anybody who has been following what has been happening, we talk a lot about power pool and dead pool at the big reservoirs, and we're upstream of the big reservoirs, but we are below Blue Mesa. And for anybody who's been looking at Blue Mesa and what is happening with the elevations in Blue Mesa and the projected inflows, there is a likelihood that we could hit the power pool or the dead pool in Blue Mesa at the end of this season, draining what's above it and making it very hard to recover in even an average winter. So it becomes real important that when we are looking at these kind of upgrades, we're thinking about how do we build in operational flexibility that we need? How do we make sure that the irrigators have what they need? How do we ensure that we maintain the flows through the national park and the Black Canyon? How do we meet the record of decision downstream? All of these things are at risk right now, and what we need is a more flexible system where we can create greater control to create these multi-benefit outcomes. So I'm going to pause it there with the PowerPoint, and I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that we can share a model here. Because this is pretty neat to start to see how this works and helps water managers. So here's our, whoops, excuse me. How did that just happen? Okay. So here's the boundaries of the Uncompahgre project. I'm going to actually take off the topography to make things be a little bit more clear. We have a few parts to this model. We have a interactive geospatial interface, which is a relational database. It looks at the flow of water through the system, the relationship between canals and turnouts and accounts and fields. It has a settings panel where we actually can look at how the system operates under different hydrological conditions currently, or we can model upgrades to infrastructure, both the delivery system and on-farm, or we can run conservation programs where we're looking at full or split season fallowing. And then for every model that we run, what is selected on the screen, we get certain insights about the system. So right now we're looking at insights for the whole system, but we could also, if we were to select an account or a field, we would have insights on the account or the field. In fact, let me just start there to show folks how that works. So here's our canals. Here's our accounts that are served by those canals. Here's our 3,500 turnouts. We're going to turn those off so you can see. Here's the fields that belong to those accounts. We can zoom in. We can select an account here, and we begin to see that the information changes. We see information about that account. We see the 3 turnouts that serve that account. We see the drainage pathway where water drains off that account, and we can see, and this is an account that participated in SCPP, and we can see, you know, there's 560 acre-feet of runoff that typically comes off of this account, and the association recaptures that water if we turn on our merge points down here at the bottom of it, and it is recaptured and taken into the Garnet Canal at this merge. And we can get information on this merge that also shows us all of the other accounts and fields that drain there, and we begin to see, well, there's 9,000 acre-feet of drainage moving down there. So when we think about participation in voluntary conservation programs, when we begin to think about infrastructure upgrades that might reduce those returns, the management changes that Steve and his team are going to need to make, they need insights to be able to understand and make sure that the planning and the implementation that happens, that the consequences are known. So this interface helps with that, but right now we're only looking at the historic conditions. So I'm going to show you how we begin to just not look at the relationship of all these components as water moves through the system, but when we begin to model and look at what would an optimized system look like if we took this rather antiquated system, and let's do what we're going to be facing this year. Let's say that the allocation is 50%, and Steve is responsible for delivering to not only shareholders, but more senior carriage contracts on the system. So we're going to model to all the deliveries that he needs to make. And then we're going to go ahead and say, okay, I want to go ahead and line the canals in the system. I want to rank those canal lining projects to reduce infiltration. I also want to upgrade farms, and I want to upgrade and rank those projects that are, again, I can do this by water quality, but I'm going to do this by where I can reduce irrigation demand. And then we run the model. It's a lot of data back there, so it'll take just a minute to get through. But what you'll see when it populates here, and I'll reset the zoom so it shows up a little bit better, is the symbology begins to show what projects are going to create the greatest outcomes. So the darker color that you have here for both the canals, let me take off the merges so you can see it a little bit better. For both the canals and the fields are those locations where we're going to have a greater impact. And when we compare with some more details, you're not going to be able to see this here, but I will just explain what the model does. It essentially says, you know, what does it look like when we run the current system as is, when we're at 100% of our allocation and we get information on that? Now, this year, we're at 50%, so what does it look like if we run it the way it currently operates at 50% and we see what those results are? What happens when we upgrade and we're at that 50%? And what we can see here in the model are the outputs are from the canal lining projects. We have conserved just under 50,000 acre-feet a year from those projects. The efficiencies that farmers have gained, because this is a dry year, those are going into production, but we can see on the economic modeling, because we also do the economics in this and the crop yields as well, that we have increased those yields by 35 million in total economic outputs. And so a year like this, in a modernized system, you have outputs that are almost comparable to where we are currently in a good water year. But again, it doesn't give you the priorities yet. So when we want to begin to see those, how do we start to look at those? And that's where we can begin to see the very specific projects in here. Let's say, for example, I want to look at every segment of every canal and lateral along this 550-mile delivery system. 2 minutes? I'm done in 2 minutes. And here you can see that the segments are ranked. We can sort them by length or by the amount of infiltration per foot that we get. And then we can begin to look at, again, these are the most cost-effective projects per reduction. So we like to quantify things in dollars per units. So how do we save the most water for the amount of money that we're going to spend. And if we want to look at that canal segment that is going to be a good investment, that's our first one. We can then look at, the second one, and we can begin to put projects together. And we're not saying that, there's a $185 million project that's going to solve all the problems. What we're saying here is we can solve a lot of the problems, and that's a lot of money, but that's a reasonable price tag. That's something less than infinity, which oftentimes the problems that we're facing sound like they're going to cost an infinite amount of money. But with a prioritization framework, you can also, you can work with less and get more higher yielding outcomes per dollar you spend, because again, you're focused on your top producing projects. So really grateful for the partnership we have with Uncompahgre to be able to work on this. Grateful for other partners in the room with the state, the Bureau that is starting to look at this to see, how can we implement this, because these are some of the these are some of the solutions that we need today. And I guess finally for the vision, since Roger had asked about that, I think the kinds of things we're focused on here, because we're talking about savings that benefit farmers, they benefit the river, both our cold water fisheries, our record of decision reaches, and they benefit, the whole basin, because we have this ability to, essentially move water upstream and gain greater flexibility in operations, and that benefits, not just the upper basin, but our ability to move water down. I think, the vision here is let's do something that works at multiple levels, and these insights have helped us get there. So thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, David. I'm going to turn the responsibility for timekeeping back over to questions. Can we ask at least each one of the presenters one really good question? Can we fit that in time-wise? And I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Absolutely. And actually, the questions with the highest number of votes are one that all of you can answer, so I will start there. So there are a couple of questions from the audience about the difference between water conservation efforts in the lower basin and the upper basin. So there's a question about, it seems like there's a lot of these efforts in the lower basin. Why isn't that, or perhaps is that, after we heard from Scott, happening in the upper basin? And then there was also a question about how upper basin water users can apply the same precision of water as the Gila River Indian community. So does someone want to go first?
I can try. I can't speak for the upper basin. I can tell you for IID, we had a little push from the federal government back in 2003. So that pressure is what initiated a lot of our actions. But we've also had very strong collaborative partnerships within Southern California to provide the funding. All of the QSA water transfers were using water agency funding. We didn't have federal monies or incentives. Back in the day, there was some state funding for the All-American Canal Lining Project for portions of it, not all of it. But we had a problem to solve, and we didn't have a lot of folks giving us lifelines, and we figured it out. And I think at the time, it was nasty. Our board's reward for turning down the agreement was a federal lawsuit and turmoil. And when they finally did authorize the agreements, it was 10 years of litigation with our county and our farmers who were not fans. Now we have farmers voluntarily signing up for programs. We actually purchased a lot of farmland as a district because our growers were suing us on everything and said they weren't going to participate. But it turns out when you add compensation in, growers make business decisions, so they may have been opposed to the conservation. And it's been very collaborative. I'm not going to say it's easy, but I probably 25 years ago when we were starting this program never thought we would be where we are now. And the conservation levels that were widely criticized and combative have been embraced by growers who have learned to be more productive doing less with partnerships. And I think, and I hope those partnerships can be established basin-wide. Maybe they need a little push, but to the extent that that can be somewhat of a model for how we can make things work in the future, I hope that's something that takes root. Certainly we're trying to push that on other, states and agencies as well.
I'll be happy to add to that. I appreciate the word push, and I think one of the pushes that has been happening in Colorado and the Upper Basin is the hydrology. The kind of year that we're seeing this year where we go on percentages, it was unusual to go on to percentages for Uncompahgre before 2000, right? Fairly senior diverter. They had a system that worked. As we mentioned, it works better when it is full. But the last 25 years, I think, Steve, nod if I'm right or give me the hand, but I think you've only had 5 years of the last 25 or 26 where you are not on percentages, right? Okay. So I think it is, necessity that has, really, driven this. And before there has, not been that need. The system was operating. So, David.
I think for the community, there were a couple of drivers. One, the community literally was fighting in courts since the 1920s, and actually one could argue going all the way back into the late 1880s. But to bring it more up to date, in the 1990s, as settlement discussions were being finalized, the community's real goal was restoration of Gila River water. It's the culturally compatible water. It's the water that the community has the immemorial right. And you did hear that correctly. Under the Gila Decree, the community has the immemorial right to the waters of the Gila River. But the political realities of the water settlement were such that the community was not going to get all of that water back because it was already being used upstream, short of putting everybody upstream out of business. At the same time as the Central Arizona Project was authorized already in the 1970s, there were a lot of irrigation districts, including tribes, who were maneuvering for their portion of the water. And once the allocations were made, not that everybody agreed to those allocations, including the community, but under the legislation authorizing the CAP, that water, that Colorado River water, has to be delivered through a lined system. Now, there can be a period of time where the water is delivered through an unlined system, but we have to be making progress towards rehabilitating and modernizing the system so we can serve all of that water that we possibly can. So the settlement provided funds for the community to improve the existing system, and then our master repayment contract for the delivery of a portion of the Colorado River water required, again, that we line this system. So I can't address why the Upper Valley hasn't done as much, or the Upper Valley, Upper Basin. I think more in Upper Valley in Arizona, but that's a different story. Can't speak to why the Upper Basin doesn't have more conservation projects such as what Gila River is doing. But I can tell you that the community has been at the forefront of finding ways, and not just with settlement funds, not just with system conservation agreements leaving water in Lake Mead. And by the way, if I didn't mention it, the community has left over 900,000 acre feet in Lake Mead in the last 10 years, but also investing some of its own funds into this irrigation project, because the community's commitment and goal is to make as efficient use of the water resources as it possibly can. Community Council is united. Governor Lewis is emphatic that the community is going to utilize all of its resources as efficiently as possible. That's why the solar is so important, because for us to move reclaimed water from upstream or from downstream to upstream takes a lot of power. We've got to find ways to offset that. And again, we've had the fortune of having good federal partners. We've had other partners. We've had some philanthropic groups, I see there in the back. We've had Walton Family Foundation that has joined with the community on a number of issues. But I think the community's desire, and I think it's part cultural, that the community wants to make sure that it is using the water entitlement that it has. Governor Lewis has said repeatedly, the community has a large water settlement, and all that means is we have a large stewardship responsibility to watch over that water.
Yeah, that's great. I will just add, I would be very remiss if I did not just put in there that the association has been actively doing piping projects and efficiency projects for the last 2 decades. So this is, but there is, as you saw, how much infrastructure there is to be working on. There's a lot left to do, so.
Thank you all. I'm going to move on to a few questions that are really centering on what happens to the water when it's conserved. So for Tina, there were some questions for you about if you could explain a little bit more what happens to the conserved water. It sounds like it's an agricultural to urban transfer. And if you could talk a little bit about whether that's a model for water management in the basin. And for Scott, there were some questions about what the ultimate effect of the lining and other projects that you talked about on the Uncompahgre system, and whether there are any consequences such as reducing groundwater recharge.
So for IID, about 500,000 acre-feet of our conservation is to satisfy the QSA transfer obligation. So that water goes to Los Angeles, San Diego, and Coachella Valley Water District under those longstanding agreements. The more recently SKIA agreements that we've implemented are funding about 900,000 acre-feet of conservation that's left in Lake Mead. So all of our deficit irrigation program water and a portion of our on-farm conservation water, we document the conservation, we cut our water order, and that water stays in Lake Mead. It's about 12 feet total over that 4-year period. In addition to the water we have in storage with the ICS program of other water agencies. But the largest portion is to meet obligations under existing agreements that provide that Southern California water supply reliability. We'll have to see, longer term, the district's role in other projects, but we become a little bit of a target with such a large water right in California as far as solving people's problems. But as you saw by that last graphic, the district's only using about 70%, 71% of its actual entitlement. So at this point in time, it's going to be very challenging to do additional conservation without considering additional fallowing, which is not something we talk about.
I'll just mention first the consumptive savings portion that we had talked about. There is the potential to pass that large chunk of savings through the system, and then you have a large volume of water that has really a de minimis number of diversions before you come to Powell. One significant diverter in Colorado, so you think of things like forbearance agreements, you already have a lot more guarantees of that water being able to be conserved, stored in the system under a conservation pool than you ever did with the SCPP program. The other thing that can be done is you can reduce your tunnel diversions and maintain that water in Blue Mesa, again creating that greater flexibility. And then the avenue that is more appealing to the association, even because of the hydropower and other service needs that it has to run water through the system, is run it through. Have it go back into the Gunnison, but exchange the credits for the conserved water back up into Blue Mesa. So those are the avenues for, sort of making sure that that water that's conserved gets, into a conservation pool that is, credited and is actually conserved. It doesn't, just evaporate or disappear. In terms of the other question was about the efficiency savings from the canal lining projects. Is that right?
I think it was, are there any negative impacts to things like groundwater recharge from the lining projects?
Yeah. So some of the infiltration in the canals and some of the runoff from farms returns to the river, and some of it does not. Unlike the system that David is working in, where you're trying to maintain these these groundwater levels, that is not a concern in this geography. What is a concern is, as we save more water, to make sure that we're creating controls where we have we're ensuring that the ability to hit those flows that we need in the Black Canyon and in the Record Decision are maintained. So we're saving water. We're particularly saving water that, has not returned to the river. And for that water that does return to the river, those savings as well as the consumptive savings can be, can also be backed up into the system. We can move that water up. And that's what would be ideal. That's what we'd like to do.
Thanks. David, the next question's for you. Can you describe some of the challenges of solar over canals? Does it make maintenance more difficult or expensive?
Well, the big challenge, of course, is cost. It is expensive. For instance, the 3,000 feet that we lined with solar panels was, with design, $5.6 million. There are a lot of benefits, however. The benefits being, and we are embarking on a 2-year study. We're working with both the Bureau of Reclamation and the National Renewable Energy Lab. We just deployed all of the equipment. We're actually monitoring evaporation losses in an open channel canal, and then we're putting a second boat underneath the solar panels. To date, since this is the second in the world, first, and I want to be clear, anybody from Turlock? Good. Turlock says they're the first in the Western Hemisphere. We beat them by 6 months. Anyway, everything we've done, it's all based on laboratory modeling by the University of Arizona and University of California, Merced. And all of that said, 46% based on laboratory studies of reduction of evaporation. We think it's a lot more. So we are actually going to be, like I said, we're starting to collect data now. We started this earlier this spring. We'll be doing this through May of 2028. We will publish the data annually. We also think the solar panels are going to be more efficient because we have the cooling effect of the water underneath them, and we're also going to demonstrate that. Next week, hopefully next week, we start constructing 6 solar panels right adjacent to the solar over canal project so we can actually monitor what is being generated on both. But to address your question of some of the challenges, we really haven't identified any. What we did, and we think, we brought the irrigation district in, the operators, and we said, we don't want to do anything that's going to make your life more difficult. So they were involved in all of our design meetings, and we made these, if you come out and visit our site, these solar tables, there's 42 panels on each one. There are 6 cotter pins. You can pop them out. The table weighs 6,000 pounds, easily picked up. It can be set off on side the canal if we had to get in the canal to do any maintenance. So we've been, again, a year and a half now, we've had the panels up. October of 2024, we went live on the first one. We've had no impacts. In fact, what we're seeing are positive impacts. Among those, when we lined the Casablanca Canal in 2017-18, it was an old earthen system. Once it was lined, we had huge algae plumes grow. We've now deprived algae on that 3,000 feet of its energy, and we are not seeing any algae plumes growing under the solar panel area. So we think it's going to have a great impact. But the reality is that project is a pilot project. It's never been done in the Western Hemisphere, so we're using it as a learning experience. But we were convinced that it was the future. There is a natural water power nexus. It makes so much sense in the desert of Arizona to have renewable energy, and it doesn't take any more real estate. The canal is already there. So there were a lot of positive reasons. In addition to all of the cultural reasons, it's culturally compatible. We've had tremendous interest by the community elders. Just recently, I went out to District 7 on the west end of the community where the Peeposh are, and the elders were extremely excited. They just wanted to understand, how does all this work? So it's all been positive to date.
Well, my last question, which was for Tina, but maybe anybody could answer, have any of these districts considered agrivoltaics are growing crops under solar panels to generate power and reduce evaporation?
So we are an irrigation district. We deliver the water. We don't tell farmers what to do. We have not seen any grower interest in that. I've been told anecdotally by some of the solar companies that they're concerned about the salts in the water and the corrosion on the steel frames. We have about a ton of salt in every acre foot of water. And it's just not, I think, making business sense to solar companies. Now, could there be some partnership? Maybe. We've had a couple professors want to do some research. We're happy to introduce them to farmers, but I have not seen any farmer interest in doing that at a large scale when you think about how they run their businesses and operate their systems.
I'll just address, we have not either. I will tell you that the Gila River Indian Community Utility Authority has embarked on a 25 megawatts project, but in terms of a connection to agricultural lands, no. Not saying it won't happen in the future, but today, no.
All right, well, I can hand it back. We're at the end of our time.
Thank you, panel. All right, we have a break for 25 minutes, so that's a good break. So when you hear the cowbell, realize you've had a good break. Come on back.